And going into about myself. So as Aditya mentioned, I have been a product professional for a while now. I've accumulated about 18 years of experience, ups and downs in IT field. I did not start off as a product manager, and I think you will notice that about a lot of the product professionals. If you go to LinkedIn profiles, the product management field is something that went a buzz in maybe in the last 5 to 6 years. I think it became super popular, but you would notice that most product managers started their career as something else. And they discovered their passion for product and they kind of navigated into that. I've also had the fortune of working in different domains and industries. Primarily, I've been focused on fintech, but I also have experience in other areas. My background, usually this is a very popular question that people ask, is what do you have to do in terms of education to get into product management? Again, be mindful that product is not necessarily a course that you can take in university and be accomplished at it. It is a very experiential kind of role. And what I mean by that is when you say you're a developer, there is a strong possibility you can go to a boot camp, you can go to university, you can learn computer engineering, you can learn computer science, and that gives you a good idea of what it means to be a developer. Same thing for testing. There's a certain amount of, or a good amount of technical knowledge that you can gain in classes, and then you can come in and perform as a professional. The product space, unfortunately, yes, there is some level of learning that you can do, but a lot of it is all about gaining wisdom over a period of time. So it's very experiential, but in terms of, the education that I did to equip myself, I do have a background in engineering. I did my MBA after a gap, and then I've also done a master's in data analytics. I've had the fortune of also working in different countries. So I'm originally from Canada, but I've also worked in Australia. Now I'm in States. I love mentoring, teaching, and public speaking, as you will see over the course today. If you can actually hear a gap in me talking, that would be rare because I'm a bit of a chatty Cathy, but I also enjoy sharing my thoughts. And last but not the least, I did have a short stint as an author. I have written a book in a collection of essays. I've contributed an essay on empathy and leadership. And I feel that the only reason I bring that up is I think both those aspects, empathy and leadership, are instrumental skills that product managers should look into. If you don't have it, then look for ways to develop it, right? So that's the only reason I wanted to point it out. Now let's go into some of the key takeaways. I like this Yoda format of just getting to the conclusion before I tell my story. So even if you did not necessarily follow the masterclass fully, I want you to keep these three things in mind. Is that conceptually, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you're going to maybe learn today as part of the masterclass, but understand that conceptually, product management is vast and expensive. And you will realize this as we're going through the course, because on every slide, I will be able to show you a concept, but that is just the core and crux of the concept. And the number of permutations that concept can take are going to be so many that you will realize, oh, this is way more than what I'm showing on the slide. So take whatever I'm giving you with a pinch of salt. As I said, it's experiential. What my lived experiences are may not be the same as someone else. We all may share some aspects of it, but it's going to be vast and expensive. Product management is also evolving. As I said, it is not a role that people knew about, say, 20 years ago. Like when IT was booming, the development role, the testing role, the role of a dev manager, these roles were quite obvious in the sense that you needed someone to build these products out. So these roles were obvious. But with product management, as I said, it was something that came up quite recently. Maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, you see it booming. So people are still trying to discover what it means to be a product manager. And as more and more companies kind of jump on the bandwagon, as it expands to more and more industries, there have been variations that people are observing, and then they're like, oh, this is much more than what we thought it was before. So it's constantly evolving. And last but not the least, this is not a term to discourage anybody, but being aware of your strengths and weaknesses is the best thing that you can do for yourself. So product management is not for everybody. And why I say that is because of certain skill sets. certain requirements of the job, certain expectations of the job, it can come as a surprise. It can come as something out of your comfort zone. And depending on what you have as your personal goals, be mindful of how product management will be useful for you or may not be for you, right? It's important that you look at it both ways. A lot of mentees that reach out to me, they ask me, like, how did you figure out that this was the role for you? How did you know that this is where you need to go? How do you take your decisions? And one of the key things that I tell them early on in their career is that try out as many things as possible. More than knowing what you like, it's very important to know what you don't like. Because eventually you don't want to be stuck in something you don't like. But stuff that you have not explored before, 50% chance that it would be good, 50% chance that it won't be, right? So I highly encourage people to go out there and try out things and find that out early on in your life, because the later it goes, whether we like it or not, it's an unfortunate truth that once you become sort of an expert in your domain, you've been in your domain for like about 10 years, 15 years, people start looking at you for that area of subject matter expertise. And then if you want to move into something else, you kind of have to start from ground zero. So those are just some realities of life that we have to grapple with. But if you do whatever you want to try out in the first 5 to 10 years, I think your life after that will become a bit more comfortable because you know what you don't like. You may evolve, you may end up liking it later, but at least you have some idea of where you want to move. So just take whatever I'm saying with a pinch of salt, but at the same time, keep that in the back of your mind that it may or may not be something that you like, but it's okay. It's okay. Not everyone can be a product manager. Not everyone should be a product manager, because we also need developers and testers and other people. So, we need a mix of all skill sets out there to create a successful product. So that being said, let's look at what you can expect for the next 90-ish minutes. These are the areas that I think would be useful for someone looking into a product management career. Again, it's going to be vast and expansive, so take this as your starting point. And then if you want to delve into much more deeper, do reach out to the folks on the call today. There's Editone, there's Bola, and we're more than happy to help you out in terms of how things should progress and give you any further advice on what you're thinking as well. So let's start with the first poll. If you want to go to slido.com, there's a number there as well. If you put in that code 3025360, that should open up the page. And the first question that I have for the day is, what is a product? What do you think is a product? So you can type in your responses in there, and we're going to see the responses in a bit. And Editone has also kindly added the link in Zoom chat. So if you would like to click on the link and open up that as well, that's also an option. All right. I'm going to quickly switch over to Slido.com just to see what responses we're getting in here. A vehicle to deliver value, good one. Anything that satisfies a need, yeah. Okay, let's flip over to my presentation in the interest of time. Let me make sure that you guys are seeing my slide again. Yeah. And in true fashion of the AI generation that we're in, I did go to ChatGPT and pull out a definition to find out what ChatGPT says. It is the organizational function that is responsible for guiding the development, launch, and continuous improvement of a product. It involves a combination of strategy, design, leadership, and market analysis to ensure a product meets the needs of its users and achieves business objectives. So I know there's a bit of difference between what the question that I asked and the definition that I have. And the reason I had that is because to show you that a product may be something that you receive in your hand, and exactly, I think you guys all have an understanding of what product is. It is something that meets a need, and it's something that's delivering value. Once you know what the need of the hour is, and you're able to provide a solution for that, you've basically delivered value. But in terms of the needs of the users and achieving the business objectives, what do you have to do within the product management space? Often we see this diagram that I'm sharing with you right now. It is the intersection of business, technology, as well as customer. This is a very common definition that a lot of people look into. But there are also some schools of thought that say, no, this is not necessarily what we're going for. I mean, I'm not necessarily focused on the technology. Technology is an enabler. It's not my core thing that I'm supporting. At the same time, business, it just makes business sense to look at what the customer wants and giving them that, because that helps you with your financials. It helps with the thriving of the business, but you're not necessarily focusing on the business. So ultimately, a lot of people argue that, or say that it's their train of thought, that the product management space is really just focused on the customer. Are you applying the right sense of empathy? Are you applying the right sense of understanding in terms of what needs to be done? And therefore, that should be your core and your function of what a product is supposed to be doing. And that's where the product manager kind of comes in and focuses. But both of the other pieces are really enablers, because without technology, maybe you're not delivering the right kind of product. And don't assume that technology is only related to IT. Technology can also relate to hardware. So things like, oh, I wanted a touchscreen phone. The whole research and development behind developing those screens that are touchscreen enabled is in itself product development, right? Or even laptops. The laptops are a product. How did people kind of think about the solution of creating an hardware product that you can take wherever you want to go? We did start off with desktops. If you remember the kind of mainframe machines we used to have, that would take up rooms and rooms in a building. From that, today we have reduced our computer to our smartphones. You are pretty much able to do anything and everything. I'm sure a lot of people are joining today through your smartphones as well. So the ability and the thought process going from such a huge piece of hardware, which was like these mainframe machines that used to sit in multiple rooms, reduced down to a smartphone device on your palm, it's just amazing evolution, right? But that was the mindset of a product manager. They didn't have those titles, but that was the mindset of a product manager. They thought, oh, I'm never going to carry rooms and rooms to places that I need to go. How do I go with much more ease? So that's how a lot of the mindset kind of started, is how do you solve a problem? How do you give the value that the user needs? Many times when I'm going to go back to the IBM problem that I just told you, they must have thought, like, every time I want to do, back in the day, that's how computation was. But back in the day, if I wanted to solve, what is 2 plus 2 times 2 minus 2? Well, what is this, BODMAS equation, and how do I resolve this? Someone had to leave their room, walk all the way down from the stairs, go to the basement where all these big machines were, then type in their query in a language that the computer understands, and then it would spit out the answer, right? So when you think about all that effort reduced now to, oh, I just pick up my smartphone, open up the calculator app, enter the numbers as I see fit and as I understand, and I get a number and I get a response, right? So that in itself is product management. That in itself is the evolution of a product. I also have a bonus slide at the end that kind of alludes to a concept that's coming up these days, which is called product sense. You will hear that a lot in a lot of product interviews, so we will have a quick chat about it, time permits. But that is what I'm talking about when you talk about a product management mindset. That's the reason why it did not officially exist, but a lot of people were actually doing product management all through their life. So that is the interesting part about product management. Now, let's look at the life cycle of a product. We know that it is something that delivers value to the customer. It takes care of their need. It is able to provide some level of interaction with the customer as well. You're able to collect data and ongoing metrics around what it does. And when you look at this chart, this basically tells you, if you thought about, I'm not sure how many parents are on the call today, but if you've had a child, I always love equating product management to parenthood, because it just comes over, it gets delivered, and then you're like, what do I do with this, right? And then you have to kind of take care of all the end-to-end matters in terms of understanding, oh, I'm sorry, is there someone who wants to ask a question? I think I'm hearing someone, but I can't really tell.
It was a hot mic, but I took it.
Okay, okay, no problem. So yes, so these are the different stages of a product that we would think about. So let's start with each column here. So the first stage is development. Obviously, for you to release a product, you need to do adequate research. You need to think about, what are the different possibilities? And we have a separate slide today that would talk about this specific stage as well, which is product development. This is definitely one of the more crucial stages because if you don't invest enough time, and I think if you are coming from a business analyst background or an IT software development background, you will always hear this phrase that if you don't invest in the original requirements and research of the product, once you get into the actual development, it's going to be more and more costly. So in the span of product development life cycle itself, the product development phase is what is most important because this is where you invest most of your time to make sure that your product is actually good. Because once you get into introduction, once you get into growth, maturity, it's going to be more and more costly if for whatever reason your product didn't do well or you didn't do the adequate research that is required. The next thing is introduction. So now that you've built your product, how do you get the word out? This is where you are building awareness. This is where marketing is really important. And another thing to keep in mind, we will go through this as we go through the slides as well. There are different roles within product management as well. So product management is just one umbrella title, but there's a whole bunch of other areas that you need to look into. So in our example right now in product development, you would notice that in the very first stage, you will require product managers who are experts in their own domain. So if I am building a solution that is in the biotechnology field, I will need a researcher or someone who has that background in biotechnology to be active in that first stage of development because I need active subject matter expertise to build the solution and the product that I'm looking for. However, when I go into the introduction stage, I will need an expert, but I am focusing more on building awareness with the users, with the community, with the society that I'm going out to release this product in. So if you think about the COVID scenario, you had the vaccine development, which required a lot of biotechnologists who are acting as product managers because they knew what needs to go into the development of that vaccine. But once you went into the introduction stage, you needed someone who understood the medical field. You needed someone who understood biotechnology, but the focus of their skill set was more along marketing. They needed to know what to say. They needed to know how to say it. They needed to be comfortable with, public speaking. If you follow Seinfeld, he makes a joke about how most people rather be the person in the casket than being the one delivering the eulogy. Everyone has fear of public speaking. So if you are a product manager with fear of public speaking, you need to think about getting into a role for product marketing because you might be going in for sales pitches. You might be standing in front of a crowd. And if you'd rather be in the casket, maybe that's not a role for you. Unless you want to, build that skill set, then that's a different story. The next thing we're looking at is growth. Once you've gotten your word out there, how do you make sure that you keep continuing that growth? Because that is where your revenue is going to come in. If you think about the business plan, more often than not, the first year is generally a lost year. If you break even, then good for you, but mostly the first year of operations tends to be lost. But after that, as you continuously invest in marketing, as you continuously invest in getting the word out, hopefully your product is actually growing. And this is where your maximum number of growth actually takes place. So the skill sets that the product manager will need to have is growth marketing. Again, something along marketing, but it's a different kind of focus. It's not about spreading awareness, but it's actually getting people to purchase your product and providing that engagement metrics in there, providing that acquisition metrics in there. The next thing you've got is maturity. This is where you're seeing that your product is successful. It is actually meeting people's needs. You are starting to see people give you feedback as well in terms of saying, hey, I'm truly enjoying the product. This is giving me a lot of value. But I think if you give me a little more of this, this could actually start making more sense to me. So you start bringing a lot more engagement. So as a product manager, not only are you maintaining what's happening within the product right now, you might be responsible for innovations that need to take place because it's not just enough to be status quo. So when you think about agile methodology, you're doing that iterative approach of, okay, now my product is out there. People are using the product. What do I have to do to go to scale? What do I have to do to support this user base? What are the different aspects of, loyalty management? How do I maintain the engagement and so on and so forth? So the questions that you would be addressing as a product manager in the maturity phase is something quite different from what you would be addressing in the introduction phase. Last but not the least, not a lot of people think about it because no one wants to think about it, but what happens when the product declines? There may be a time when the product is not necessarily needed. Let me give you an example of a product that is not necessarily in decline, but you can kind of see this cyclical process that goes through. Think about your tax products, your Intuit tax. You might be using any other H&R block. These are products that have a routine cycle of actually being used extremely high between that January to April timeframe. And for the rest of the year, no one cares if it's alive or dead, right? So there is a genuine cycle of growth, maturity, and decline that it goes through every year. So if you think about it, they need to think about keeping their business afloat in those months that people don't actively need the tax product. What do they do during that time? If you have any examples of what happens during that time, feel free to type them out in the chat. Oh, I see someone who's not able to see the slide. I hope you guys are okay. I guess there's only one person. Okay. So yeah, if you have any examples of the kind of marketing that you've seen with H&R Block or any other tax tools during the times that you don't actively use it, you'll realize that they actually offer classes. They try to get people to come into their location to learn how to do taxes. They also talk about their nonprofit ventures. They talk about how corporate taxes can be handled. So think about what their marketing team might be going through, or even the product manager might be thinking. They know that by the time April comes, everyone is like, oh, I'm done my taxes. I don't want to look at a tax form again. And then they have to keep them engaged for the rest of the year. So decline is something that you really have to think about, because a lot of people focus on onboarding your users, meaning how do you welcome them onto your platform? But no one really thinks about offboarding. Have you realized, and I see this a lot in the banking industry, in the financial industry in general, and it's one of my biggest pet peeves, is that whenever they're selling you something, they're so eager to get you on board, right? They give you royal white glove service. Like, it's just the best thing. You're like, my life is going to be the best ever. And then think about the time when you have to close that product. My goodness, it's like you're asking them to donate their kidney, right? It's like, dude, that's my money. Just give it back. But they just won't. The number of forms you have to, like when you're onboarding, they have the most superior technology that you can find on the planet. It's like, oh, just tap a button and we'll get all your money. You don't have to do anything. But when they're returning the money to you, oh, we have to submit a request to the back end. Someone in the back end has to approve your request. Then after they have approved, it has to go up the escalation process. Another team needs to know about that. Then we need to actually print the check. I'm like, what do you mean you need to print the check? You had a one button money move when you took my money. Why can't it come back in one button? No, it doesn't. It will have to come in the mail. Do you want express mail? Then that would be another $10. But if you don't want it in express mail, it'll come to you in 25 days. What do you mean 25 days? Mail takes 10 to 15 business days. Yes, that is true. But, it is coming from our head office, which is located in Timbuktu. And the postman has to walk from there. Then he has to post on his side. Then there needs to be a plane that comes over, and then you'll get your money. So by the time you ask for your money back to when you actually get it, you might have actually gone to your retirement point, right? So people don't necessarily think about the offboarding experience. And what is the experience that the user then takes away from them? They don't remember the onboarding experience, which was a one-button click. They don't engage with the experience where, you really got good service. But what they take away is that, oh my God, getting my money back from them was like pulling teeth. That's the experience that they're taking away. And think about that. You've got boomerang users too, right? Like, I might close my product today, but if I'm going to go and pass a word of mouth marketing to someone else and tell them that, hey, I had this product with this organization and they made it so easy for me when I was onboarding and when I was offboarding. Think about the impact of that conversation versus when someone comes and tells you, oh, they took my money, all right, but by the time they gave it back to me, I never got it back, right? So you always have to think about the decline aspect as well. So what happens when a customer is moving away from your product or when the product ceases to give you value, right? So both of those are important. So with
Obviously.
that, let's go to our next slide, which I think a lot of people here would be quite interested in, is what are the different product roles that you can get into? And as I said, the product world is ever evolving, so you will find some new titles. And unfortunately, there are also other cases where some companies, cover up product management under other roles as well, right? So they might just call you an analyst. They might call you a product analyst. And they would be like, well, technically, it's not a product management role. It's an extension of business analysis, or it's an extension of a technical analyst role. But essentially, this is how I look at most of the product roles. So when you think about the business side and the technical side, the skill sets that you're bringing to the table are slightly different. Obviously, the technical folks need to know a bit more about the domain. So if we're thinking about software roles, you might need to have a better understanding of API. You might have to have a better understanding of AI, data, depending on whatever domain you're in. And on the business side, you do need some understanding of technical aspects, but you are a bit more focused on the monetary side of things. How do you run the business? What are the different aspects you need to think about to make sure that the product makes sense to the users, and so on and so forth. And within that, you've got two layers, which is the strategic layer and then the tactical layer. Strategic layers generally tend to be on the program management side of things. So how do you run that whole program? How do you run the whole aspect of it? What are the different aspects you need to think about? A lot of the MBA style thinking that comes in there as well, right? And then on the tactical side, these are the people who actually do the work in terms of delivering something. So more often than not, tactical and technical kind of go hand in hand because you're building the product, you're actually doing something with it. But even within the business side, there is a tactical layer. So the two boxes or the two shapes that you're seeing there, the product manager and the technical product manager, I've actually put a span of it over. So the product manager can be anywhere from a technical strategic role all the way to a business tactical role. So there is a spectrum that you can fall under. Similarly, for technical product managers as well. You could be a lead technical product manager. You could be the guy who's making decisions on what the solution architecture should be. You might be the guy who is making decisions on which vendor product you need to work with. What are the APIs that we need to build? All the way to business tactical stuff where you're doing assessments on like which solution makes more business sense, what costs less for us, what are the SLAs that we need to look into, right? So you've got that range. And that is where I think you will notice a lot of the roles to be. And this is one of the reasons why I was saying that product management role is highly evolving, meaning depending on the company that you go in, depending on the need that you have, you can be slotted into any of these roles. Now, the more cleaner roles that I would say, which are a bit more obvious if you hear about the titles, is the technical product owner. Both the technical product owner and product owner tend to be working with agile teams. So you are actually working with a Scrum format, you're working with a Scrum Master, you're working with developers and testers, and you're actively working on user stories, you're delivering functionality, and so on and so forth. So that's a bit more clear cut. Although I have seen some scenarios where people call the title as product owner, but they're doing a product manager's job. So again, from company to company changed a little bit. And I highly, highly encourage you to ask a lot of questions during the interview to read in between the lines to understand what the role actually entails. Questions like, who are going to be my day-to-day stakeholders that I'm working with? What kind of daily deliverables do I have? Am I actually delivering strategic documents? Am I actually delivering user stories? What are my metrics going to look like? What are the things that I'm going to be managing, right? So these are the things that will help you uncover those fine-tuned differences between what a product manager does and what a product owner does. As you move up the ladder, you've got the director of product. More often than not, they manage a portfolio of products, right? Products that are similarly grouped in some way, and they have some sort of an interconnected aspect to it. Because I come from banking, I love taking banking examples. So when you think about a director of product, you could be looking at someone who is managing checking savings accounts together. Both of them are some sort of deposit accounts. Both of them have some notion of day-to-day banking, so that might be something together. Meanwhile, another director of product might be managing the credit accounts. So they might be looking at your credit cards, they might be looking at line of credit, they might be looking at any other loan products that go out to like mortgages and things like that. Then you've got your group product head. It's another layer of grouping on top of director of product, and they might be looking at a combination of portfolio. So you might have people like, oh, I manage the retail banking group. That means I manage all the products that, a day-to-day customer actually walks in for. So that could be anything under the sun, right? That they might need an insurance, they might need credit products, debit products, they might have financial advice, anything that a retail customer might be looking at. And then last but not the least, the role that we all are hoping to aspire to one day, the chief of product or the chief product officer, CPO. And these are C-suite roles that you would be sitting at the same seat as, or at the same table as the CEO. You will be looking at organizational strategic decisions and discussions and so on and so forth. So these are sort of the roles, and each one of them will probably have a different type of strategy in terms of how they want to build their career. Different companies will have different pathways as well. There might be some companies that still don't have a chief product officer, and that's pretty common. Often you would see the product organization report into the CTO because the technology officer generally tends to be responsible for delivering the technology products. You might see in some cases that they report into the COO, which is the operations officer, because at the end of the day, business runs because the products are, being delivered and so on and so forth. So each company has their own definition in terms of how they want to build it. But more often than not, these are the common roles that you would see in the product space. I'm going to offer you coffee and cookies. That is correct. Yes, exactly. Okay. I know, the chief product officer. It's a role to die for, Bola. I have to say that. Awesome. Let's go to the next poll. So out of the roles that you saw there, why don't you put in, again, go back to the Slido link if you want to add what role you are interested in, and I will flip over to that poll in a second. So what are some of the skills of a product management professional? And I'm sure this is another very popular question that comes among our mentees, is that how do I prepare myself for this role? What are people looking for in the interview? And it's always tough to give a straight answer simply because of the reasons that I've mentioned to you so far, is that, it's a very evolutionary role. Every industry, every company, when you walk in, they're going to ask different things of you. But at the end of the day, we can say to some extent, with some level of confidence, that these are some common skill sets that you should have, or at least start building if you are interested in this. Number one is communication, communication, communication. I cannot stress this enough. One of the reasons why I became a chatty Cathy is because over the years, I have built my communication skills. I have understood what it means to talk in a big forum such as this. I have understood what it means to talk in a smaller forum with two people. I have understood what it means to have a coffee chat. I've understood what it takes to, catch up with an old acquaintance where I might have some professional related goals that I want to discuss with them. I have understood what it means to have a cold call. I've understood what it means to talk to a senior person. I've understood what it means to talk to a mentee, right? Every layer of communication that you're gaining, when someone says public speaking skills, it doesn't mean that you have to stand on top of a stage and talk. Even when I'm talking to a single person, it's public speaking. Anything that I'm not talking to myself, if I'm not talking to the, my imaginary friend in my head,
I hope you enjoy.
Then I'm talking, if I'm not talking to the imaginary friend in my head, then I'm probably talking to someone outside, which is public to me, and therefore that's public speaking, right? So every time you're presenting yourself, every time there's an image of you that's going out there, it is communication, it is public speaking. So don't classify one-to-one relationships any different from how you would speak to a crowd. More or less, they're similar. Once you understand the audience, that's where you build your communication, right? You may have heard of the term stakeholder management, and I want to introduce a new term here, which is slightly different from stakeholder management, is relationship management. Because in product management, you're not necessarily managing a stakeholder because they are not a single entity that you're going to be working with, but you will be working with the legal team. You will be working with the privacy team. You would be working with the development team. At some point, someone or the other from that group is going to come to you, or you are going to go to them to get something accomplished. Usually in the stakeholder management mindset, a lot of the times what happens is I know this person specifically, and I'm going to cater my communication to this person and what they like, which is good. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, But in product management, because the work is so much more vast, you need to open your mindset to what does that entire department really require? What does a developer from that team require? What does an API developer require? What does a backend developer require? What does a database developer require? You have to start thinking in terms of something much larger because you're not necessarily in charge of resourcing. You're not going to be a leader in the true sense, not in the traditional sense. You're going to be an influential leader, meaning you have to appeal to everyone's sensibilities. You're going to be like, come with me because this makes sense, not because do it because I'm your boss, right? A vast difference in terms of how you're going to interact with these people. Change management and expectation management. These are huge. Change management, I think, is pretty obvious to most people. Expectation management, telling them at all times what they need to expect, constantly monitoring that and setting the right tone for things is something that you have to balance the product manager. Because you're going to be the spokesperson for the dev team because you need to protect them, but at the same time, you also have to be the spokesperson for the business team. You're going to be somewhere in the middle, and you have to make sure that both sides are kind of happy. Not all the time. You're still doing what's best for the product, but both of them have to be happy to keep that relationship going. Then, as I said, leadership. You've got to have your own leadership. You've got to be a self-starter. There's not going to be another product manager in the same role, managing the same product as you. That doesn't work in product management. You are solely responsible for the OKRs that you're responsible for. Strategic thinking. You got to think more than the day-to-day stuff. If I do this, am I going to anticipate something that's going to happen 5 years down the line or even 10 days down the line? What's going to happen? Okay, if I make this change, what happens to user base number 1? What about the user base number 2? What about complementary folks? What about my competitors? You're thinking about all these different points. Analytical skills, that goes without saying. User empathy. This is a big one. And this was the reason why I highlighted my essay as well in my introduction slide. Is you've got to have that aspect of what about this person? Why is this person thinking this way? You've got to have that curiosity. And last but not the least, adaptability. If you are not comfortable with being uncomfortable, that is something you need to think about as a product manager because every day it will feel like butterflies are flying in your stomach simply because butterflies don't know where to land. That doesn't mean that, someone else out there knows it. Nobody knows it, but you're just going to be more responsible than the other people, right? If a developer doesn't know something, it's okay because they'll be like, you should check with the product manager. But if the product manager doesn't know, where do you go to check, right? You have to have that inspiration. You have to have that curiosity. You have to have that analytical set of skills to be like, okay, what is the problem here? Okay, maybe this is a data issue. Okay, maybe this is some other issue. You can use your developers to find out and peel the layers and be like, okay, where do you think the problem is? Can you help me technically what needs to be done? You can sit with the QH, do some test cases and find out, okay, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening here. But ultimately, you're the one who's joining all the dots because the developer in QA, they don't have the business knowledge or the insight. They might not have access to security, privacy, and all the different stakeholder groups that you work with. But you need to join the dots and connect all the places and be like, okay, this is kind of where I think it's coming from. So those are some of the soft skills. On the technical side of skills, I did list technology. It doesn't mean that you have to have a computer science degree. It doesn't mean that you have to have a computer engineering degree or any kind of engineering degree, but you need to have some interest and, savviness on the technology side. Meaning if someone was to come to you and talk about front end, back end, you need to have some idea of what that actually means. If someone tells you, oh, this is a responsive design, you need to have an idea of what that means. So to be able to speak in the same language as the developers that you're speaking to be able to speak in a way that people understand or know and believe that you are capable of understanding technological innovations is something that you need to bring on board. It doesn't mean that you need to have a degree or in-depth knowledge because at the end of the day, you're not the SME of everything, but you need to know enough to have a healthy conversation with SMEs, right? Think of yourself as an interviewer. Say you're going to interview like a super popular person. Say you got Elon Musk and you're going to go interview him, right? When you're going in there, you cannot ask him basic questions around like, what is a Tesla, right? Or you cannot ask him why did you even think of like what is Tesla as a product? Is it a car? Is it a machine? Like you can't go in there. You need to have adequate preparation. But at the same time, you cannot be a PhD in whatever technology he's working on, because when you go to the interview, you'll be like, I don't even have to ask him this question because I know the answer, So it's a very fine line, right? You need to be prepared enough to ask the right questions, but you're not the SME such that you assume all the answers. So it's somewhere in the middle there. Have some idea of the domain or industry that you're going in. This is a hard one to gain experience in because it's a chicken and egg issue. Unless you give me experience in that domain, how am I going to learn more about the domain, right? So it is something that you need to know. If you're going into fintech, what does it mean to have different banking products? If you're going into manufacturing, what does it mean to have Six Sigma lean? If you're going into sustainable technology, what does it mean to have, ecological balance? What is ecological footprint? How do they calculate carbon footprint? So understanding some of the domain or industry related skills. UX design skills. I highly, highly recommend this because I feel like a lot of the product management concepts about the customer-centric focus came originally from the UX design skills. For example, the concept of design thinking, the concept of empathy mapping. All these things are things that came out of the UX space. So if you do have an opportunity, I would highly recommend taking a basic course in UX design to kind of understand what their thought process was, because I think it would be super helpful for you to go into the product management space. Agile, that goes without saying. The ability to take feedback, the ability of iterations, the ability to constantly look outward for feedback and then incorporating the ones that make sense, using the backlog concept, prioritizing, all those things are key agile concepts that you should know to be successful as a product manager. Financial sense. This is not super high in my opinion, because at the end of the day, as a product manager, in most organizations, there's a separate team that kind of manages all the financials. But if you are able to understand, what does it cost my customer to do something? What does it cost the business to offer a specific service to the customer? What are the metrics around that? It definitely gives you an edge over a lot of the other people who don't necessarily understand the financial sense of things. But again, I would say that this comes much later in your career rather than early on in your career. But it's good to have if you have that background. Marketing. Again, this is a basic skill that I think most product managers should have, because you need to be your product's biggest evangelist. If you are not proud about what you're working on, if you are not able to tell in 30 seconds what you're actually proud about in your product, how your product is able to meet a specific need, how it's able to deliver value, then there's no other spokesperson for your product, right? You are the person who's managing it. It's almost like, your mom and dad telling other people that this is the best kid in the world. They have to be your evangelist, right? That's how a product manager has to be about their products as well. So understanding how to spread awareness, understanding how to identify the need, identifying where the market is, that is a big part of being a product manager. And last but not the least, current affairs and trends. I think this will come with time, but following the right kind of people on LinkedIn, following the right domain and industry kind of leads on various portals will definitely help you. For example, I come from the payments industry, and I follow a lot of the payments accounts as well, because I want to know what's happening in the industry. Eventually, that's going to help me make strategic decisions as well when I'm working on my product. So that's a big piece that a lot of people will build up over a period of time. All right, product development cycle. Don't get too worried about how many different concepts and how many different steps there are on this slide, but this is just to give you a notional idea of all the preparation and work that goes into product development. If you remember on this slide, we actually saw the first stage, which is the development stage. This slide is basically a blow up of that very first silo that you saw. What do you have to do to create a successful product? So first of all, it's research. You have to understand whether or not your product makes sense. You have to understand whether or not it's worth it going into it. Then you go into ideation. What are the different ways you can achieve the solution? What are the different things you need to put in to address the need? Next is you go through concept development and prototyping. You try to come up with different, scenarios of, okay, maybe if I do this, this is how it would work. Maybe if I design it this way, this is how it's going to work. Then you've got your concept testing. People might have heard of alpha testing, beta testing, gamma testing. All of that comes into this picture, is just trying to break what you've built, right? A lot of people think that prototyping is really to find out if your product works. And more often than not, this is a common problem that a lot of people run into, is that they only test the happy path. They're like, oh, if it actually works, if people use it properly, then I don't have to worry about it. There was actually funny article that I read that for the longest time, you design for the stupid was basically the crux of the story. But it was like, you're building washing machines, but you'd never anticipated people to like put their kids in the washing machine or climb into the washing machine and do things to it, and then be like, oh, washing machine is a dangerous appliance to have. And you're just like, well, humans were never supposed to enter the washing machine. It was for clothes. So you have to design for the stupid, as they said at the end of that story. Or even think about the alternate scenarios. Basically, you're trying to break what you've built and try to find all the weak points where something might break. And therefore, you're trying to strengthen it through that iterative process of prototyping. Then you've got the engineering, development, and testing. So now you're actually building the product from, moving away from the prototype phase. Potentially, this could also be a high fidelity prototype. When you're thinking about industries where product is actually expensive, for example, if you're thinking of, chips, microchips that are being built that have raw materials like gold and cobalt and things that are really expensive, they might not be building a lot of prototypes, and they can be going in a process that's called agile, which is like waterfall agile, but it's not quite completely waterfall, but it's not completely agile, because there's so much investment in the cost of materials that they have to be very careful when they make mistakes and so on and so forth. They have to be very careful. So sometimes engineering, development, and testing can even be a high fidelity prototype compared to the low fidelity prototype that they may have built in the previous step. Then you've got your marketing, then you've got your launch. I don't know if you guys were around for this, and maybe I'm dating myself here, but Gmail, when it first came out, it wasn't a free service that anyone could sign up to. You had to know somebody who had to know somebody who had to know somebody, and there was an elite group of people who got invites to sign up on Gmail. Luckily, at that time, I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, and I was actually one of the first few testers who got access to Gmail, not through public sign up, but through invitation, right? So these are some cool marketing ways to make your product really cool, because you're like, oh, this is a super elite product. We only send out a few invites. And then everyone is clamoring to get onto your platform because now they're like, oh, I must be special because I got an invite, right? So understanding the concepts behind marketing and launch, but at the same time, this also helps you contain your product going to scale. You don't want everyone in there. You just want people who are truly interested in testing your product and people who would be interested in giving you feedback as well. So it's a good way of controlling. So this is a notional idea of how the product development lifecycle goes, but depending on the product that you're building, depending on the domain, some of these steps may actually expand to more steps or even reduce. All right, before we jump to the next poll, I know I said we were looking at the different product roles. So let me see here if, ooh, nice. Lots of chief product officers there. I'm so happy to see a lot of interest in that space. Business analyst as well, nice. We can definitely talk a bit more about the business analyst role in the Q&A session, but I have been a business analyst in my past life too. In fact, I think that's how Bola and I met on one of the conferences. It was a BA conference. So I've been in that role as well. So if people are interested, we can also have a conversation about that. Now, going to the next poll, you saw a whole bunch of stages here. If you want to share any other stages that you feel should have been included in this, or you went through this, but I have not addressed it, feel free to put that in the poll, and let's look at the results in a bit. All right. The next thing is market and user research. Now, this is where I think most folks, actually, before I do that, let me just quickly check chat to see if there are any other questions. All right. Knowledge of best tools. Yes, that's right. Yes, thank you, Bola. Awesome. So let's look into the market and user research side of things. So this is where I think most of the MBA folks, if you have prior knowledge in the business side, will actually see a lot of common ground here. But market research, again, is a massive and vast space that you can keep going into. You'll find a lot of rabbit holes that you can get into. And there's a lot more to uncover from that whole idea, right? So you need to be mindful of how deep you want to go. Again, I want to point you back. Please anchor your thought process to why. The question why is probably the biggest question that a product manager will ever ask themselves and ever pursue. If you are able to answer a question with why you're doing something, you hit the jackpot. If for whatever reason you're not able to answer that question, it means either that you need to do more research on it, or number two, maybe this is not worth it. I've also been a process improvement expert before, and one of my favorite questions again was why, right? And they would say that we have been doing this process for a while, and I would go to them and I ask them, why do you do this process? Who is using this data? What is happening on the downstream? And they'll be like, I don't know. We are just doing this because we've always done it this way. That is the most dangerous response that you can get from a business or anyone who you are interacting with, because they clearly have no idea why they're doing it. They're doing it simply for the sake of doing it, which shows inefficiency, which shows that the vision and the value for what you're trying to do has not gone through. And number three, they're wasting resources, right? You're paying someone to do something that they have no idea why they're doing, and they have no idea what's happening on the downstream impact as well. So why is an extremely crucial question that you have to kind of pin at every step of your process. So even in market research, say, for example, you decide for a specific product, you say, I'm going to do some market segmentation. You have to be able to ask and answer that question. Why am I doing market segmentation? Does it make sense for me to do it at this for the purposes that I'm looking for? If your answer is, okay, maybe I have not found a good answer, or maybe the answer is not good enough, or I don't have the answer, either go out and find out if market segmentation is really important, try to understand a bit more as to what that is. Or the other option is skip it altogether. You don't have to do it if you cannot answer the question, right? And one of the things that I recommend product managers also do is document the reason as to why you didn't do something as well. The key decisions that you make at every point is what's going to come back and bite you later. Because you would be like, someone will come to you and be like, why did you spend all this money on market segmentation? Why did you do this pilot? You have to have a good decision and good documentation to support what you did. Because at the end of the day, you will have to answer that question and be like, I did this because of these reasons. The second advantage of documenting that is 5 years down the line, your product is doing, in whatever level of proficiency that it's at, something changes in the market, right? And you're like, this changes in the market. This has changed in the market. I don't feel like my product is really addressing this change. You can always go back to the decision that you documented and be like, okay, at that time, this was the market scenario, and that's the reason why my product took this direction, or this is the strategy that I took. Today, the market has changed. So this strategy doesn't make any more sense. So decisions that you took 5 years ago, or even the last month, the kind of pace with which a lot of the organizations are going, I personally don't remember what happened last month, right? So if you are documenting these key decisions, a lot of people ask me, like, what is the level of documentation? I don't want to write stories. I don't want to write, Homer's Iliad or something like that. I don't want to write War and Peace on every product that I'm building. No, you don't have to. But you have to document key decisions, because that's actually going to protect you in some political scenarios, in corporate politics. And it's also going to give you insight into why you did something. So if the criteria actually changed, you're able to make those changes accordingly in your strategy. So market research, that's one concept. On the right side, you're looking at user research. This is a bit more insight into the UX design principles. As I said, UX is a great support when it comes to understanding your clients, because user experience, that is their bread and butter. That is the focus of what they do. So understanding what you are trying to uncover from a specific study. So there are 4 different types that I generally like to talk about. You've got your behavioral and you've got your attitudinal. Behavior is, why is a person behaving a certain way? It almost goes into user psychology to some extent. And attitudinal is, if you are giving the users a specific stimuli, you're saying that this is what is going to happen. What is their attitude towards it? What are their inherent biases? What are some of the things that they carry with them, right? So when we are talking about a lot of societies and communities and people coming from various backgrounds, every culture is going to have its own mindset of how they come in, right? And that is going to have some sort of impact on your product. versus other people might be thinking about it in a very different way. And then you've got your qualitative and your quantitative, and that I think is quite self-explanatory. If you have things with data that are specific data points, you've got quantitative. If it's more of qualitative, where you need to elicit the feel of something, something that's non-tangible, something that cannot be expressed in numbers, that goes into qualitative. And for each one of them, you can see that there are different tools and techniques and frameworks that you can use. For example, the information architecture testing, the usability studies, cart sorting, and so on and so forth. So both of these tools are instrumental in helping you understand what you need to do for your product before you venture into the whole idea of, am I going to be building this product at all? But don't keep these tools just for the beginning of the product phase. I think at some point, the product manager has to continuously revisit this to make sure that what they're doing for the product is indeed validated in the market. You can't just assume that, oh, I did this 10 months ago when I started my product. I was fine back then, so I'm going to be fine now in 10 months. Look at the way COVID changed our lives, right? So things that were extremely successful before COVID were not really successful when COVID was happening. We all took a hit, right? The next thing is product strategy. And I think this is one of the areas that a lot of product managers require a lot of experience in. And again, to my point about product being an experiential kind of role, meaning you're constantly gaining wisdom from things that you've done, whether those be mistakes or whether those be successes. And there is a saying that says, a foolish person keeps making their own mistakes. A smart person makes the mistakes and kind of understands from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from another person's mistakes, right? So that's the kind of wisdom that you need to play in with product as well, because you not to talk about anyone's life expectancy here, but on average, we're on planet for about 70 to 80 years. Even if we start working around 25 and we retire at 65, we've got 40 years of work that we do. Within that, for the first 10 to 15 years, most people treat us like spring chicken. We are still gaining our respect. We're still trying to prove to the world that we're good enough. So, whatever 25 years that you have left, not only do you have to be an expert, you have to continuously update yourself. You have to continuously stay relevant while managing your mortgage and loans, while giving time to your kids, while giving time to your better halves, while your parents are around. It's a lot. So long story short, you don't have the time to try and test out everything. So this is something, again, that I recommend to all my mentees, is that follow the right kind of people on LinkedIn, social media, and any of the professional platforms. Go for coffee chats. Go and talk to people. This is where the whole concept of communication comes in. The amount of information that you can gain from someone else's experience is so amazing. And yet we think that, we need to focus on ourselves. So it's very important to look outward for feedback and gaining information from other people that you can then leverage in your own experiences. If we were all of the mindset that I need to do things on my own to learn something, we will probably be rubbing stone still to make fire, right? We have to leverage other people's wisdom and keep growing. And I think that's where the strategy part is so important, because strategy is something that you will not see immediate results on. Strategy generally shows the outcome in like 3 to 5 years. But if you were to wait on everything that you do for 3 to 5 years to see what the strategy was, you may never actually see, how many of us actually stay within a company for 3 to 5 years? On average, I found a statistic that most people stay with a company for roughly around 3 years, 3.5 years. That's what the stat was. So you wouldn't even be around to see whether your strategy was successful or not. But if you were able to take some of the industry practices and bring it in, the probability of your strategy being more successful is going to be higher. You are able to create a more trustworthy network for yourself. You're able to create a better brand and image for yourself. So even after you leave the company, if your product continues to be successful based on the strategy that you had implemented, then that is like kudos to you. Even though you're not there in person, you're there in soul, it worked out. Anyway, this is a strategy framework that you can use and look into, again, this is a lot more detailed. You don't necessarily need all these components. Again, ask that question, why, why? Does it make sense for my company to go into this much detail? Does it make sense for my product, the stage that it's in? We saw those 5 stages. Does it make sense for me to go through all these stages right now? What do I need to fill out? What do I need to hide? Think about that why question continuously. And now we're going to jump into product metrics. Again, this is also another area that the product management space kind of revamped. Back in the day, it was very simple. People would ask for KPIs. There used to be the SMART goals that you are targeting. You specifically focus on things that are achievable and things like that. But I think product management changed a lot of the output metrics to outcome metrics, right? Output is extremely focused on the tangible needs. How many stories did you deliver? What was the burn down chart like? What was the velocity like? How many account signups did we have? How many people onboarded? Very tangible, very focused on a specific action. But product management extended that a bit more to say that you're not looking at the output, you're looking at the outcome, right? And a simple analogy to this is, say you're running an organization and you've got 5 people on your payroll. You notice that these 5 people are always sitting at their desk for the 40 hours that they're supposed to work. But when you look at what they've actually delivered, it doesn't reflect the 40 hours of effort, right? That's where a lot of companies have changed to flexible work methods. They say that I don't care when you work, how much time you work, but I need the outcome done, right? But if there are still companies that are just saying, no, from 9 to 5, you have to be at your desk. I need to see you online on Teams. Suddenly you've got people who are at their desk, but is it really delivering the value? Are they really completing the tasks that they're supposed to do? Maybe not. So that mindset shift from looking at metrics that don't necessarily deliver value to metrics that measure value was a massive change that product management brought in. And over here, I'm just sharing a newsletter which gives you an example of, what does it mean to have actionable success metrics versus superficial metrics, right? So saying things like, exactly, if you look at row number 3 there, which talks about the examples, superficial metrics, which would have been our output-related metrics that we have been looking at, before product management was around, we would have just been like, oh my goodness, I had 100+ app downloads, so my app must be super popular. But once you download the app, it's just sitting in someone's, mobile device. They have not opened it, they have not activated it, they have not created a login, nothing, right? So the action of downloading the app is important. It means that someone is interacting with it, but it doesn't necessarily show that the user has obtained any value by downloading your app. At what point do they actually get value? Is when you look at conversion rates, meaning that they downloaded the app and they created an account, which means that at the very least, they interacted with your onboarding process. At the very least, right? And then once they get that account, what did they do after that? Are they still coming back to the account? That's where you kind of look at it with the user retention rates. How much are they interacting? Are they purchasing things on your platform? That's where your revenue growth is kind of looking in. Did they just do a one-time purchase? Okay, one-time purchase is a good thing. They started off, they kicked off the process, but how much are they coming back to do more? So understanding the difference between a one-time action versus ongoing action, understanding the difference between an acquisition metric versus an engagement metric, all these are different layers that you can peel into as we go into a lot more metrics. I didn't want to cover too much into metrics today because it is a bit more of an advanced topic, and I felt it was a bit of heavy lift for a masterclass. But again, we're going to be around, so if you have more questions about metrics, happy to cover those as well. Relationship management. And I guess this is something that a lot of you are interested in, and I wanted to stress this again, of moving from the mindset of managing stakeholders to managing relationships. Remember that when you're managing stakeholders, you are not creating reusable frameworks for yourself, meaning if you are managing Elon Musk as your boss, you have a certain personality type, you have a certain stakeholder, he has a certain way of dealing with things. And therefore, your mindset would very much focus on that one point in saying that this is what Elon Musk would be like. But in a different world, if you end up getting, Sundar Pichai, Google CEO, as your stakeholder, he again is a point where he's a stakeholder that you are managing. When you move away from that mindset and you think about relationship management, you start thinking about how do I manage a relationship with my CEO? That becomes a reusable framework that you can apply in multiple domains. You're thinking about the importance of that relationship in your product management journey. How will a CEO influence my role as a CPO? How will the director of product influence my role as a senior product manager? How will they influence my role as a product owner? So understanding the conceptual difference between a relationship and a stakeholder. I'm not saying one is more important than the other. I'm just saying in the grand scheme of things, when you understand what the relationship dynamics are, it's easier to figure out the stakeholder dynamic because stakeholder is one point in the entire ecosystem. But the relationship is almost like an umbrella that you can create for most of the roles that fall in that space. So this is just my personal opinion that you need to pivot from a stakeholder management mindset to relationship management mindset. Relationship management is also a bit more mature thinking, meaning as time goes by, as you gain more experience, you will slowly coast yourself towards relationship management a bit more than stakeholder management. And that's a natural evolution. But just something to keep in mind as you're growing in this space is there is a difference between managing relationships and managing stakeholders. And on the right side, you can see a little graph that I've put in there. I think, again, this is something quite obvious if you've been a BA before, if you've been a PM before, a project manager, if you've been a program manager, and if you've had any sort of business-related role where you are managing stakeholders, right? You are managing multiple people, you're interacting with different groups. You will have this sort of a matrix in your mind where you would be like, okay, this person looks more like he is someone who would, manage my work and has a high level of interest in my work, but he can really make a lot of difference. So one of the examples in high interest, low influence are your end users. So I used to work on a platform that was used by the front and bank tellers to do their day-to-day jobs, right? So when you walk into a branch, you've got your tellers in the front desk. They are interacting with an application. That is the application that I used to manage as a product manager. So in that role, the bank tellers had high interest in what I was doing, but they had relatively low influence in what they could say because at the end of the day, they would give me feedback, but they couldn't necessarily change the direction of the project itself. Often what would happen is their feedback will have to be synthesized by their business owners, and then the business owners would be like, yeah, this is like a one-time problem. This is like a multiple people problem, and they would be the ones who are kind of filtering it. So if you think about that sort of a scenario, it's high interest, low influence. Or even think about a scenario where your company is buying an application for you, right? Maybe it's deciding to invest in Microsoft 365, or should it be Google Cloud? They're making a decision. More often than not, the person who's signing on that invoice is going to be a senior person in the organization, but they are not the people who would be interacting with this application on a day-to-day basis. So often there's a massive disconnect between who's paying for it, but who's actually using it. But when you think about the vendors, when they come into an organization, who are the people that they pitch to? They pitch to the guy with the money. They're not even thinking about the people who are actually using the product, right? And even within the companies, the person who's making the decision is the one who has the money, not the one who is using the product day to day. So there's always, you have to think about this as a product manager, a massive gap between who's actually being impacted versus who has the money versus who has the power versus who has the decision to change the direction of the project versus supplementary users versus downstream users versus people who are admin versus the front-end users. Who are the people who are configuring? Who are the ones who are using the reports? There are all these components that you need to think about, and each one of these people will fall somewhere on this matrix. So understanding that whole concept of how you're going to be interacting with these people and how they will be influencing your project will make your life that much easier because now you know how you need to interact with them, right? It's again, to go back to a family analogy, it's like if you know what, the in-laws behavior is going to be like, you may get nice in-laws, no problem. But if you generally know what in-laws is going to be like, you would know how to do the relationship management. Once you get married, then you know, okay, my father-in-law is like this, my mother-in-law is like this, right? That's your stakeholder management. But before you got married, you have a rough idea of what that relationship is going to be like. So that's a slight difference between a stakeholder management scenario and a relationship management scenario. All right, so I think that was the last one of my slides. Again, to reiterate, key takeaways, as I hope I've impressed the importance of how vast and expansive product management is. And I think Bola and Edison, both of them will agree with me that we've barely scratched the surface with this master class, right? This is literally just like you walked into Baskin and Robbins and they gave you a little scoop of every ice cream as a taster. That's all we have done. But if you're going to take a scoop or a waffle cone or whatever you're going to go with, it's going to take a lot more. So be mindful that it's much more vast and expansive. It is constantly evolving. Product management wasn't what it was when I started in this role. And I think it's still evolving. It's changing directions. It is changing shades. It's changing components. There was a time when people told me that roadmaps are really important with product management. But if you follow a gentleman called Marty Kagan, who was one of the pioneers of product management, he has written like the three holy trinity of books now, which every product manager kind of reads. And he was one of the folks who started saying, okay, roadmaps are an out-of-date thing now. So at one point, roadmaps are really important, and now he's saying, maybe they're not that important. So it's constantly evolving. We as product managers are product management as a career. So it can get more, what is the word I'm looking for? It's not more, that Leonardo, more inception-like than this. It's like product managers managing their own product management career as a product, right? And last but not the least, product management is not for everyone. So just be mindful of that. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the status of this is a state of reality. Except that there are certain things that you're good at, certain things you are not good at, or certain things you have interest in, certain things you don't. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what that was. And I guess we can go into Q&A, but I think we had one poll that we still had. Oops. Give me one second.
There were no specific questions in that last poll. I'm guessing everyone then think you had anything you missed.
Sorry, what was that?
No, I was saying there were no specific questions in that poll. I think the only comments we got was answering the previous poll.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool. Yeah. No worries. So, okay, so I guess we can do Q&A now. If not, there's actually one more slide. Would you like me to cover that as well, Aditun? How are we doing for time?
We are doing good, but that depends on the number of questions we get. So far, we don't have any questions on Slido, but I'm wondering if people just want to raise their hands with any questions or put questions in chat or still use Slido as well. I think we're doing good, yeah, but the questions would make that decision, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't I just go ahead and maybe just share this one more slide that I had. I added this as an afterthought because this is something that was trending, and I thought I'll bring in some trendy topics within product management as well. But the concept of product sense, this is a terminology that I'm hearing that come from a lot of FANG companies. If you have been following some of the companies that are super popular for product management, they used to be called as FANG companies. I'm hearing that it was changed to MAMA recently. So FANG stands for Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. What was the second A? Apple and Amazon, sorry. FAANG, FANG companies. And I heard that it was changed to MAMA because Microsoft got added. Then you got Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. You had Apple, then Facebook changed into Meta, and the last A was Amazon. So I hear both the terminologies being floated around, but product sense is something that comes up in a lot of their interviews. They're always curious to find out how much product sense a person has. And if you remember, we looked at that Venn diagram with the three circles, which was like the business, customer, and technology. And I also mentioned that a lot of people's, school of thought is that that is a bit outdated and people don't necessarily think of it in that way. But this is another way of, how that thought process has kind of evolved is like, what is your product sense is you could have the abstract side and the concrete side of things. And under the abstract, how much of the user do you understand? What is your level of user empathy? Are you able to figure out what they're looking for? Are you able to elicit the right kind of requirements from them? Are you able to elicit the pain points from them? And then how creative are you? Are you just thinking about the traditional mindset of how to solve a problem? Or are you going beyond what needs to be done? How do you explore that aspect of creativity? And I think that sort of comes from how much in tune are you with the trends? What are the latest things that have come out in the market? One of my favorite things to tell to my mentees as well is watch programs like Shark Tank, right? And I think in Canada, it's Dragon's Den. I think that is one of the best programs out there for product managers because it gives you a sense of what it means to pitch your product. What does it mean to, present to VCs and investors to say, hey, these are the aspects that they would be interested in. How do I actually meet their needs, right? How do you show that your product is successful? How do you impress the judges on the pain point? Do they believe that the product that you've picked is actually a problem worth solving? How do you impress that? How do you show them your commitment? Because some people start off their product space, how they start their business, but have they come up with creative ways to sustain themselves? Because money is not freely available. And even if a VC is going to be investing in your business, they need to know that you are thrifty and you've got good financial sense to manage what they're giving to you, right? So a really good show to watch. Another one, if you haven't seen, and I personally liked it because I'm a bit of a foodie and I love looking at food-related programs as well. But there was a show that Netflix has, I believe it's called Restaurant Turnover. I can't remember what it was, but there are two programs of that type. One is that you pitch a new pop-up restaurant idea to VCs. They'll give you a spot in like downtown London or some popular city, and you basically have to create a restaurant within a week, and you have to, raise the marketing, you have to raise the awareness. It reflects to you, how much research you have done about the taste palettes, about your products, about how you're marketing it, how people like it, and what have you done to do. But so that's one. Another one is the restaurant turnover, which was essentially, a poorly doing restaurant. How do you innovate and improve that to bring new foot traffic to the restaurant? I personally love both those programs. Of course, there's a lot of drama and fake name calling and all that stuff that happens, but ultimately, lots of business information that you get there, a lot of product management related tools that you're able to find there as well. On the concrete side of things, I think we talked about it. You've got the design knowledge, and this is going back to my point about learn a bit more about UX, understand what the UX design principles are. And also be mindful, UX and UI are two different things. UX is user experience. UI is user interface. User interface tends to be closer to front-end development, which is more technical, is related to coding. User experience is a lot more research-based. It's a lot more psychology-based. It's a lot more understanding your users through quantitative and qualitative methods. So a lot more research is involved in that site rather than UI. So be mindful of what you're looking in. And business acumen. This is the part that I was telling you about how a lot of people who do their MBAs end up in the product management space these days. It's become a trend. I know comments about that. We really have to figure out how the trend kind of goes. Ultimately, I believe that you can be a good product manager regardless of the background that you come from if you have the right kind of curiosity and the right kind of skill sets in your hand and you're consistently updating yourself, right? Because you have to be relevant in the industry if you have to understand your users. There was one time we started off with baby boomers, and now we are coming to, millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, and all the other, cool generations that we have kind of run out of alphabets to name them with. But, all the new slang and terminology and memes and challenges, post-COVID kids. We now have a generation of babies that were born in COVID, which apparently have different brain developmental growth compared to kids that were born before COVID. Who would have thought? I did not think that, right? I was like, well, all babies are born in the same way. All parents are nice to their kids. They must be the same. But no, apparently the society connections that they make, the community connections that they make makes a big difference in their developmental process as well. And it was something that was obvious. A lot of my friends who had their kids during that time, they were telling me how the therapist and the pediatrician was telling them some different stories. But anyway, long story short, this was another term I kind of wanted to introduce to the audience today. And let's see if we have some questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Amazing. Thank you, Banu. That was really insightful. I think we do have a couple of questions on Slido and a few in the chat. So we'll probably start with the ones on the chat. The first one is, does it help to have been an entrepreneur before venturing into product management space?
Very good question. There is also another train of thought that, or school of thought that people say, where they're saying that being a product manager is being the CEO of your product. I am half on the fence and half not on the fence with that one. Being an entrepreneur is good, but you have to realize that entrepreneurs are generally focused a bit more on running the business rather than building a product. So I think while you're running or building an entrepreneurial venture, it depends on how involved you were in building a product. A lot of people tend to be there as a financial support, a silent investor, or even as someone who says, hey, I've got a good network. Let me see how I can promote this product, right? So you need to be very careful with the kind of skill sets that you're building. So that's why I said, regardless of your background, you can be a great product manager. Ultimately, what matters is the skill sets that you're bringing to the table. Are you able to survive with those skill sets? Are you able to be a good product manager with those skill sets? I definitely think entrepreneurial aspects do help you, because some of the things, especially around fundraising, especially around understanding what the startup environment looks like, because every product would have started off as a startup, right, at some point. So having access to that knowledge and insight to what happens as an entrepreneur is definitely a good thing. But that is not the only thing that you would need. I wouldn't say that every entrepreneur is a great product manager. It definitely shows that you have the capability and the grit to see a product through to go to market, and being able to release it out there and seeing how the product is doing. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that is the only skill set that you would need. So it's good to have, but you still need to build some of your other skill sets depending on what you're lacking and what you need to gain. Hopefully that answers your question.
I'm sure it does. The second question is, what is the best way for a business analyst to make an inroad into product management?
Thank you. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask, because I was on that exact journey. But my personal opinion, again, to quote a joke that I've read before, I think this was posted on IIBA's LinkedIn feed as well. But back in the day, if you didn't really know what a person did and you knew that there was a gap in the organization, you would hire a person in that role and you would call them a business analyst. So I think there was that gap in understanding of what a business analyst does, right, for a long time. But I think with the evolution of product manager, the business analyst role has become a bit more rounded and scoped out, because now they're like, okay, these things a business analyst does and these things a product manager does. So again, similar to the response for the entrepreneur, I would say it depends on what are the skill sets that you have gained as a BA. Those are the aspects that will help you understand how much more do you need to learn as a product manager. But if I was to traditionally look at what a BA did and how you would venture into the product management space, one of the biggest things that the BA does not necessarily have control on is direct access to users and direct access to customers, which is a massive gap that you would see between the BA role and the product manager role. A product manager does have access, direct access to their users to understand what they're feeling, how they're interacting with the product, the metrics associated with that, and so on and so forth. Usually in the BA space, it tends to be another reporting BA or a metrics BA, right? So if you think about it, the BAs are almost siloed in saying that, okay, you are specifically working on this application, build the system requirements for this. You might be interacting with BAs from other departments, but at the end of the day, you're kind of focusing on your own piece. So if you were a BA in that sort of sense, then there's definitely that skill gap of making sure that you understand what the larger picture is. What does it mean to interact with the other teams, and what is their area of expertise? How do you kind of gain that? How do you gain the overall picture of what needs to be done? There's also the aspect of prioritizing. A BA usually interacts with other people to get priorities, but they're not the ones who are setting the priorities. But as a product manager, you need to understand your users better, and you need to know enough about what you're trying to do to be able to come to a room and say, okay, this user story is more important than this one. So the concept of prioritization, which brings in that business acumen, the business insight that you need to make those decisions. The other thing that I would recommend is also managing the end-to-end. I won't say the project management side of things, but it's really managing the product, like what needs to happen at what time. Who do you need to interact with? What are the outcomes? So those are some areas that I would say if you were a BA before, you will have to expand your knowledge base to gain insight into all these other areas as well. And then I think you would be in a good position to at least move into a product owner role. I usually recommend if you're going through this transition, it's good to kind of start as a BA, then go into a product ownership role, because that is a combination of BA and a bit of product management as well. And once you understand the role and scope of product owner, it's natural to kind of move into the next level, which is sort of the project manager. There's a bit more strategy that you can handle on the product side, and you can start moving up the career ladder that way. So I personally, that's the direction I took. I also took a few other detours in the middle where I was a scrum master because I wanted to understand the agile processes. I was also a business accountant or a business executive. So on that side, I kind of understood what the financials were on the business side. So when I was, selling 16 accounts a day, or I was selling like 28 accounts a day, what kind of impact does that have on my bottom line? How do I have to report to the COO? How do I report to the CEO? So understood the C-level, C-suite executive concepts as well as part of that business role. And then it made a lot more sense to me when I moved into the product management space to say, okay, I create this report for this purpose. I create this communication for this purpose. And going back to my earlier point about communication, you can really score well, and you can create a good brand for yourself if you were able to understand those distinguishing points as to why you're doing certain things. Again, going back to the question about why. So those were some of the things that I did to make sure that I was kind of gradually moving in the right direction towards the product management role, which would be, I think, slightly easier than making a direct jump from BA to a product manager, because there might be a lot of skill sets in the middle that you're missing. I've also noticed from a lot of people that if you are within the same company, it's a bit more easier for you to switch in between roles rather than being BA at a different company and then moving into a product manager role in a different company. Because you have to build the trust aspect as well, and people need to know that you have the capability to move into that new role. So that's what I would recommend, is that doing a proper skills assessment and gap analysis of what's missing, and then slowly working towards that role in a more incremental fashion.
Thank you, Banu. I think you might have answered the other question, but I'll just ask it. This person has some experience in business analysis and data analysis and also project management, and they were wondering about the best role they can start from in the product management spectrum, and they were
Mhm.
also asking if they needed to like change job titles to be able to like you know have this transition done.
This is an interesting question, and I probably have to kind of do this on a one-on-one basis because it will have to kind of depend on, what are some of the job tasks that you had in that specific role. At a surface level, I wouldn't recommend changing titles if your title was not truly a product manager, because obviously, you want to be as true as possible in your resume. So I wouldn't recommend that you change blindly in terms of the roles. But what I can recommend is, number one, your resume should be reflecting so product managers are generally, when you look at their resume, you want to highlight impactful things where you have brought in some huge metrics, like, you improved customer acquisition by 10%. Your market, if you are on the product marketing side, you improved the click rate of the emails by 3% per campaign or something. So having outcome related metrics on your resume is a big bonus if you are able to explain that. However, in your previous roles, even as a project manager, I know there are lots of skill sets that kind of overlap with the product management space. But if you are able to bring those outcomes in the description, I think those would have a higher impact in your resume rather than just the title. Because at the end of the day, even in the title, you can be, if you have done some product related tasks, you can always say project/product manager. That, in my opinion, is not incorrect, because you did have some aspects of a product management role in that specific job, but you need to be able to quantify that. If all the tasks that you have listed under the project manager title are project management related, I think it would be unfair and untrue if you were to say that you were a product manager, right? So you need to make sure that you are ethically showing that you have integrity as well when you're submitting the resume, because you don't want your employer to start feeling that, oh, this person submitted a resume and it's full of lies, right? So whatever you're mentioning as a title, you need to make sure that your description is supporting that. So if you feel that the tasks that you have listed under that specific title is reflective of a product related task that you've done, then I think it's fair to kind of add product to the title and saying project/product or business/product or data/product type of titles. But I wouldn't recommend changing it completely to product manager if the description doesn't support that. That is something that a lot of senior product managers are looking out for as well. And they basically say, I'm very careful of people who pass off project management and business analysis as a product role because they are not successful in the roles. And that is just reflective of the fact that there are different skill sets that you need to think about. So I would be careful about that. One other thing I also wanted to mention in that was, usually when you do submit your resume and say you were successful and you move to the final round, when your company reaches out to your old company to get references or confirm your employment, if they get a different title or a different response from your previous company, that can also reflect badly on you. Not all companies necessarily do this because they would be reaching out to references, but there could be scenarios where they just ask for proof of employment, and within that proof of employment, if your title looks different from what it is, it could cause a concern. So I would be careful with how I, position my past role. I see where you're coming from, because it's a bit hard to, product management is also a little bit hard to get into because they are looking for very specific set of skills. And I can see why that would be a problem, but be very careful of how that impacts your image and branding as well. You don't want to come across as someone who's lying on your resume, basically.
Absolutely agree. Thank you, Banu. There is a question about if there are specific or particular tools that a product manager would use that would aid in planning strategic product vision and features. So they're asking
Yeah.
about tools. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So for tools, I think the most popular one that you would see across the industry would be Jira. Jira actually has the ability to build user stories. You can build epics, which helps you build roadmaps and, the strategic vision. So if you're looking for a tactical tool, that's the one that's most popular in the industry is Jira combined with Confluence. But apart from that, if you're thinking about how to do something conceptually, a tool at the end of the day is just something that enables you to do something. If you Google, you'll find a whole bunch of them. I think I've seen some really good roadmap tools as well. You can even do planning on Excel spreadsheets. Like, it's not complex. But where I would recommend you gain experience in is the act of planning itself. So even if you have a piece of paper and you're writing your thoughts down, to go through the steps to make sure you've considered everything that you need to consider, to make sure that you have consulted people that you should be consulting. That is more important when it comes to planning and strategy rather than the tool that you're using. Because ultimately, some companies don't even have any strategic tools. If you go in, they'll be like, oh, we didn't even purchase that module in Jira. We just use it for user stories. Or we use Trello for our tickets. That's it. But all the strategy work that they do comes in PowerPoints or in some sort of a deck tool. So when it comes to strategic planning, I would recommend that your skill set should be more along the lines of doing that activity and making sure that your analytical skills in that space is sharp, rather than focusing on which tool you should be using. That's just my humble opinion. But there are definitely lots of good tools out there that you can use. So I believe there's a plugin in Excel for Gantt chart that you can use. There's also a plugin in PowerPoint, which also brings in Gantt charts. There is Jira, as I mentioned. There is also a tool that specifically does roadmap. I can't remember the name of the tool right now, but if you Google it, they have a free account and everything, so you can try it out on your own. So definitely that's available. Another one I wanted to recommend that I personally like is ClickUp. It's also a tool very similar to Jira, but I personally feel it's much better than Jira. So for some of the nonprofit organizations that I've volunteered with, I've actually set up ClickUp for them. It helps you with project management, product management, managing timelines, creating lists. It has Confluence-like features. You can tag, you can integrate it with Google Drive, with other external applications as well, WhatsApp as well. So it's like a collaborative tool as well. So I personally loved ClickUp. So there are definitely tools out there, but I would recommend you sharpen your tools in doing the activity rather than the tool.
Thanks, Banu. And before I ask the next question, speaking of tools, our session tomorrow, we're still continuing tomorrow, and our session tomorrow would be covering, Basil will be taking us through how we can design on Figma. And we also have a Jira session coming up on the 9th of June. So you want to keep those dates in your calendar and join as well. Banu, next question was, are there professional certifications for a product manager?
It's a very, very good question. If I had a penny for every time I've gotten that question, I would be rich. But long story short, no. There is no professional certification for product management. For product owner, yes, there is. Product owner is part of the Agile Manifesto, which means that organizations can have their product owners certified to understand the Agile processes and how product owners need to contribute in software development or the Agile process. So product owner, you do have certification. Product manager, we don't have certification simply because of what I've been telling you throughout this master class is that product management is very, very experiential. You cannot say that this is what a product manager should know and this is what a product manager should not know, or this is mandatory and this is not. Depending on the role that you're in, whether it's a marketing role, whether it's a growth role, whether it's a mature product role, Depending on the industry that you're in, are you in IT? Are you in manufacturing? Are you in oil and gas? Are you in food? Your roles would be different. Depending on what stage your product is at. Are you at the research stage? Are you, in the marketing stage? Are you in the growth stage? All those things tie into the skill sets that you need to be successful as a product manager. Because of that very variation, because of that vastness, it does not exist. But I wouldn't say the backdoor way, but this is how I compensated for the lack of a certification. What I did was I gathered as many resources as possible and I talked to as many people as possible, right? Courses that, such as this, like even attending the class today, you are a step ahead than someone who has not attended this class. You now know what it takes for a product manager to be successful to some extent. Again, I've not covered everything under the sun, but to some extent, you have an idea of at least where the starting point is. I would do a skills gap analysis. What are some of the things that, even if you look at the jobs that go out there, go to LinkedIn, type out the title that you're looking for, gather a whole bunch of jobs that look interesting to you or the companies that you want to work at. Look at the skill sets that they're asking for. Where are you compared to those skill sets, right? Look at all the gaps that you need to bridge and then try to find ways to bridge that gap. That's how I would prepare myself to be the product manager of my dreams. Because at the end of the day, there are going to be a variety of product manager roles out there, but you need to identify which one aligns and gels well for your personality, your interest, your domain, your skill set, etc. So when you do that exercise of, hey, looks like, most product jobs are asking me for knowledge of APIs. I have not worked on APIs. What do I do? Let's take a Udemy course. Let's take a boot camp. Let's bridge that gap. A lot of these courses are asking, or a lot of these jobs are asking me that I need to have experience with a product that should have gone to market. How do I get experience and go to market? Going back to one of the questions that was asked before, do I become an entrepreneur? Do I build a product and show people that I have the capability to take a product to market? There are no code solutions these days. There's Gen AI. There are tools. I mean, I think tomorrow when you interact with some of the tools as well, you will see more, insight into how you can use Figma to design a product. Can I build a portfolio for myself? A lot of these jobs are asking for prior work experience. I don't have any prior work experience, but I have skill sets. Can I create a portfolio and put that on my resume so they know that I'm bringing something to the table? Am I pivoting from another industry? Were there skill sets that I gained in the other industry or other roles that I can bring over to the product space? How do I highlight that on my resume? So I think there has to be a lot of introspective self-awareness actions that you will have to do, simply because product management is not a linear role where you can say like A, B, C, D, I've done, and now I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Every person is different, and I'm sure Bola as a product manager, he's going to have a different skill set and experience compared to me. Aditone is going to have a different set of skill set compared to me. All of us have had our own lived experiences, right? And that's how we grow as a product manager. And eventually, when you start building that subject matter expertise, you start building your brand. People who know you, they know that, oh, okay, Aditone is really good at engagement metrics. Let's bring her on board for engagement-specific projects. Bola is really good at marketing, so let's bring him into a product marketing role. I might be really good at, decline or something, product decline. How do we do product innovation there? So let's bring this person on board. So as you're building your authentic role in product, people will start realizing that that's your area of expertise. And again, this goes back to what you put in your resume. What are you highlighting as your main achievements in that role? So those are some of the things that I would kind of leverage. Certifications are good. I wouldn't say they're a bad thing. I think they're a wonderful resource for people who are either starting in the product manager role or they're just pivoting, because it kind of bridges the gap of what they did before versus what they need to know, gives you a stepping stone into what more you need to know. But I don't think good product managers or great product managers or the popular ones that you see on LinkedIn are necessarily good because of the certifications that they took, right? It's because of the experience that they gained. It's because of what they achieved rather than what they've studied. But I wouldn't completely negate, because I always believe that there needs to be a balance between theory and practical. And I definitely think that theoretically, if you're able to go in there with an understanding of the terminology, understanding of the frameworks and the procedures like you did in the masterclass today, that still gives you a better edge than someone who has gone into that role without any understanding.
Amazing, 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 amazing. Thank you so much, Bano. The last question is, I think you already answered. The person was asking about how to switch from being an HSE engineer to a product manager role. Well, I think everything, all the questions you've answered would sufficiently address that. This was such an insightful session. I personally, I'm taking away the fact that I want to go away from like stakeholder management to like relationship management. And something else that stood out to me was, like having the wisdom to learn from other people's experiences and their perspectives and making sure I'm connecting with them and communicating with them to have that learning. Because like you said, product management is experiential. I think this was a fantastic session. You're well of knowledge and experience, and we're really grateful that you took time out, of your busy weekend and schedule to like share this experience with us today. Thank you so much. And for everyone, I'd like for us to give like virtual applause to Bano just to show our appreciation this afternoon. Thank you so much, Bano. I know this sessions, they've been graciously sponsored, even though we are joining for free, but it's cost something. It's cost Banner's time, it's cost the time and the resources of the organizers. And our key sponsor, that powered this session, this series of masterclass is 6dots.io. And I would call on Bola right now to speak to us briefly about 6dots before we enter this session. Thank you again, Banu.
All right. Thank you, Banu. Thank you, everyone. My name is Bala. I'm just going to, we have 2 minutes and I don't really talk so much. So that's good. I would just, I just want to share briefly what 6dot is about and what you can, I'm not sure if you're seeing my presenter view or if you're seeing the real. Okay, great. So our company is called 6dot. And I think why is we really want to empower and transform professionals to live their best career and all of those things. And as a result of that, we're solving 3 problems. I'm going to rush this. We're solving 3 problems: underutilization, underrepresentation, and underachievement. And that's really why we sort of like created 6dot as a home for growth. Now I'm going to jump in 1 minute to some of the courses or the programs that we have planned. And for Q3, the first one is Product Management Deep Dive. And guess who's the trainer for that? Banu, of course. Tentatively going to start July 20th till September 8th. It's going to be like 8 weeks, 8 weekends each. We're going to finalize that within the next 1 week. So you can check 6dot.io/product for that. We also have a couple of courses like the PMP Bootcamp for project managers. That's going to start July 3rd for 7 weeks, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You can check out 6dot.io/PMP on that. For business analysts, there's a CBAP certification starting July 2nd, 7 weeks, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, 6dot.io/CBAP. There is a more practical, hands-on, project-based program for business analysts. It's called Business Analysis Immersion Program. It's going to be run for about 10 weeks, Saturdays, Sundays, and Thursdays. The next cohort is starting in August. You can check out 6dot.io/BAIP And then more agile, Ban was talking about, agile, POSM, Jira, Confluence, user stories, features, road mapping, product vision, and all of those things. Strictly from an agile standpoint, one of the technical skills that you should learn and master is agile as well. So this program runs for 8 weeks, every day, crazy, Monday to Saturday, for 8 weeks. The next one is starting July 15. You can check out 6.io/AIP. And then there's a more certification focused one for product owner, product managers, and then Scrum Masters. Because you're joining here, we just created a discount code for you for folks who are attending here. So when you're registering, you'll see a promo code. Just put H.O.P.S and you get 20% off any of these courses for Q3. And I was able to finish at 3 p.m. on the DOT like I'm on TOP.
In
I'll give
case
back to
most
you.
of you didn't know, Bola likes to rap. That's his other skill. But thank you very much, Bola. Thank you, 6.io, for sponsoring this session. Thank you to everyone for spending time with us. I'm sure you took a lot away from this session. Thank you again, Banu. And just so you know, I've put schedule the remaining master classes that we'll be having. I've put that in chat. Please mark your calendars. I know the invite might not have put the dates in your calendars. So mark your calendars and don't forget to attend. Thank you for joining. You can also stay connected with us on LinkedIn, where we initially posted this. I'm going to put those in the chat as well. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and you would also know how we would be sharing the recording of the session. Thank you again, everyone, and I hope you do have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye.